Welcome back. This week's material synthesizes current political events, specifically the Iranian protests, economic collapse, and President Trump's interventionist threats, with ancient Jewish prophecy, positing that we are witnessing the pre-Messianic fulfillment of the fall of Persia to Edom.
Wow, okay, that's a tectonic claim. It's drawing a very high-stakes line between ancient texts and today's headline. Let's get right into making sure that argument is earthquake-proof.
The argument's real power comes from this feeling of immediacy. Trump's threat, the police in Iran running away, the currency collapsing. It all feels like it's lining up perfectly.
Right. And that feeling is its greatest strength, but it's also where it's most vulnerable.
Exactly.
So while the core framework powerfully connects geopolitics and prophecy, the material could really strengthen the logical chain by demonstrating why these particular modern events are the intended fulfillment, and not just, powerful coincidences.
The weakness, as I see it, is that it's a huge jump. It goes from very specific current events straight to the prophecy, without really detailing the textual criteria that make this moment unique.
Yes, it relies too much on that feeling of timeliness, that sense that this must be it.
Which feels powerful, but isn't a robust argument on its own.
Not on its own, no. And the piece itself even notes that the sages warned against predicting exact manifestations, but then it turns around and says this one feels precise.
To get past that, the argument has to work harder. It needs to rule out past historical parallel. Okay, I see that, but haven't we seen versions of this before? I mean, what about the 1953 coup? That was a huge Western intervention in Persia. Why isn't it enough to just say those were precursor?
Because calling something a precursor is just speculation, unless you can textually eliminate it as the main event. If the thesis is that this is the final fulfillment, then this crisis has to meet a specific criterion that the 1953 coup or, say, the Iran-Contra affair simply didn't.
So the suggestion isn't just to mention them, it's to define the prophetic requirement and then show very clearly how those past events fail to meet it.
Precisely. That's what elevates the current moment. For example, let's refine the trigger event. If this is all happening now, you need to show how Trump's specific threat fulfills a deeper, spiritual element of the Edom-Esau identity.
Beyond just being another powerful Western leader.
Exactly. Does it connect somehow to, say, Rabbi Kessin's analysis of Esau's potential for repentance, for teshuvah?
That's a much deeper question. It shifts the entire thing from geopolitics to spiritual destiny. A political move is one thing, but an act tied to Esau's repentance? That's a whole different level of prophetic significance.
It has to be. And to really nail that down, you need to explicitly contrast this moment with past conflicts. Briefly, but clearly, articulate why the Iran-Contra affair or even the 2003 Iraq War do not satisfy the requirements in the Piska Rabbati or the Yalkut Shimoni. Show why they weren't the trigger, and you make a much stronger case that this one is.
That makes sense. That line of exclusion is what turns a correlation into a necessity.
Yes.
Okay, that's a really solid point. And speaking of the text, I was fascinated by how the material tried to tackle that huge historical contradiction about Persia.
Oh, that was excellent. The discussion about Persia being accused of destroying my house. It's insightful. Historically, of course, Cyrus let the Jews return and rebuild, but the Midrash says God gives Persia over to Edom because they destroyed his house.
A massive contradiction.
Huge. And the argument would just gain so much gravity by establishing a clear hierarchy among the three interpretations it offers.
Right, so it lists the three possibilities: God's ultimate authority, an end-of-days reincarnation of the spiritual force, and moral responsibility.
The weakness is that it presents them as equally possible.
And that just dilutes the focus, doesn't it?
It does. It leaves the reader thinking, well, which one is it? I get why it was done that way. It feels academically thorough, to list all the traditional answers. But if your central claim is that we are living through the Messianic scenario right now, you can't offer three competing reasons why. It undermines the confidence of the claim.
So the suggestion is to prioritize. You need to pick the interpretation that best serves the thesis that this is happening now, and that would be the end-of-days reincarnation one.
Precisely. You have to foreground that one. The argument should be that the sages intentionally included that puzzling historical detail.
As a kind of flag.
As a flag, exactly. A signpost for future generations, basically saying, when you see a new Persia that actively opposes the redemption in Jerusalem, that's the one we were talking about.
Oh, I like that. That reframes the whole thing. The contradiction isn't a problem to be solved. It's a feature. It's the key.
It becomes the key, so you explicitly elevate that interpretation. You argue that the spiritual force of modern Iran, with its funding of hostility against Israel, is what finally fulfills that ancient, puzzling verse.
And then you can subordinate the other two interpretations.
You make them footnotes.
Right. They become historical context, things that add depth, but ultimately culminate in this final spiritual opposition.
Exactly. It creates a single, cohesive reason for why the prophecy is triggering now. It's just a much stronger, more focused argument.
Okay, let's shift back to Edom then. Specifically, the identity of this prophetic act. The connection made between Edom as Western civilization and Trump as a specific figure is very compelling.
It is, but to solidify the core claim, the material has to be more rigorous in defining how that fluid concept of Edom, which has meant Rome, the West, America, gets precisely anchored to President Trump in this one moment.
The weakness right now is that the link feels a little speculative, especially when it brings up the idea of teshuvah, of repentance.
Yes.
If Esau, or Trump, is key because he's supposed to do this repentance, how does that constructive role connect to the destructive role Edom plays in the prophecy against Persia? The piece doesn't quite bridge that gap.
That is the central tension it has to resolve. If the prophecy says Edom destroys Persia, how is that an act of repentance? I mean, otherwise, any strong American president could fit the bill, right? And the specific identity of the head of Edom doesn't matter as much.
So the suggestion is to analyze the destroying mechanism itself, but through that spiritual lens of Esau's role.
You've got it. Detail how Edom's role here isn't just generic geopolitical destruction, something any empire could do. Argue that it's an act of spiritual consequence, tied specifically to Esau's redemption.
For instance,
explain how Trump's specific actions, like threatening military force to protect protesters or fundamentally changing the Mideast alliances, how did those actions manifest that unique repentance aspect of Esau that previous heads of Edom lacked?
that's the crucial distinction. That would make him the definitive figure for this prophecy's culmination, not just another powerful leader. It elevates the whole discussion.
It does. And there is a phenomenal textual clue in the Yalkut Shimoni to lock this all down.
Which is?
The part where the king of Arabia goes to Edom for counsel, that detail is not an accident.
Wow, that's a powerful anchor because it's so specific. It's not just Edom as a general Western bloc. It's the specific power that the Arab world seeks out for advice and strategy.
So you have to use that point explicitly. Explain why America's leadership in this coalition, counseling Saudi Arabia, threatening military action, confirms its status as the singular head of Edom needed for the prophecy.
It proves Edom isn't just the West. It's a specific leadership structure, fulfilling a role laid out thousands of years ago.
That level of surgical, textual proof is what makes the argument truly robust. It transforms a broad observation into a targeted, specific prophetic ID.
Okay, this is powerful material. So to wrap up and maximize the impact, we focused on 3 key areas for improvement.
First, you've got to strengthen the textual criteria for why this moment right now is the definitive fulfillment. Rule out past events by showing exactly how they failed to meet the prophetic conditions.
Second, prioritize that end-of-days reincarnation interpretation. Make it the central key that resolves the historical contradiction about Persia destroying my house. That keeps the focus on modern Iran's spiritual opposition.
And third, you have to rigorously connect that fluid definition of Edom to the specific, redemptive role of Esau and Trump. Show how the actions align with repentance and use those textual cues, like the King of Arabia seeking counsel, to lock it in.
Implementing these changes will make the argument significantly more robust. It elevates the entire claim from a compelling coincidence to a powerful, textually supported interpretation.
We really look forward to seeing the revised analysis. Please do submit it back in for a further critique.